The Daily Grind with Joey Daly.
All right, on the podcast today is Robin Gieseler with Relson Gracie Academy. Did I say everything right?
You did. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for being on. And before we get into why you started your own Jiu-Jitsu Academy, what got you into Jiu-Jitsu? Were you picked on as a kid, or did you want to beat up the bully?
Yeah, really? I was picked on a lot. I grew up on a farm in a very rural sort of area, and I was always a small kid. And even though I'm 6'4" and over 200 pounds now, I was a small kid. I was a late bloomer. I got picked on a lot, and I was really good at talking my way out of fights, out of getting beat up. But I guess I tell people now, like I would use things like self-deprecating humor and just being goofy to get out of fights, to kind of avoid conflict. But I always walked away, with a terrible feeling, like, man, I hated that guy, did that to me or made me feel that way. I wish I could beat him up,
Yeah.
And I came close a few times to getting beat up, but I did a good job of talking my way out of it. But nonetheless, the bullying was still bullying, and I always wanted to know how to fight, but I never. I knew from my dad. Like my dad would always say, "Hey, if somebody picks on you, it's your right to fight back." He always told me that was the case, and to defend your sister and all those things. And but he just didn't have the skills to teach me how to fight. He was a giant of a man. He was 6'4", 300 pounds. I mean, nobody messed with him. He was a nice guy, and so he just didn't have those skills to teach me how to defend myself. He told me it was right to do it, and I knew that. But when you have that fear of not knowing what the outcome is, and I saw a lot of fights growing up, and I just knew I wasn't that aggressive. It was a problem, and it really bothered me. And then when I was around 20 years old, I was working at a golf course, going to OSU Lima, the branch out there, and these guys at the golf course were talking about this guy Randy, who was, really tough guy, and knew this jiu-jitsu stuff. I'm like, jiu-jitsu, is that like ninjutsu? Like, I always wanted to, as a kid, I always loved Bruce Lee and watched all those movies, and I always wanted to be, martial artists, but it was just not in our family's budget or really even ability to take me to classes. And jiu-jitsu really wasn't that well known at all. It wasn't in the popular vernacular.
That was 90s?
That was 90s, yeah. 80s and 90s. And then, so I met this guy, I want to say maybe 93, 94, something like that. And he was this small, really happy-go-lucky guy. He was like 5 foot nothing, and I don't know, 5'6", 5'7", small guy, maybe 135 pounds. And he actually approached me. He's like, "Hey, you're the one that's interested in jiu-jitsu." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess." I was nervous about it, but he's like, "Yeah, all right, cool. I'm going to go watch this fight this weekend. If you watch it on pay-per-view, watch it, see what you think of this guy Hoist, and if you like what you see, come see me next Thursday." And so I was like, "Okay, sounds awesome." So I rent this pay-per-view and I watch Hoist Gracie, a guy who's built, very much like me, not physically, imposing at all, like 6'1", 170 pounds, something like that, and he was taking these guys down, all these professional martial artists from all these different styles, taking them down and choking them out and not even hurting them.
Yeah.
It was a fight. Like it was back then, no weight class, anything like that. So it was a fight. I mean, there were very few rules. No biting, no eye gouging, and I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And he was able to take all of those high-level martial artists out of their element, take them to the ground, and finish them almost seemingly with ease. And I was like, man, I gotta learn this stuff. And so that was my start. I found that guy. I was just super lucky to run into him.
So once you started training in your 20s, were you anxious to use that on the streets at all? Or did you guys
there was a time where I was picked on a lot as a kid, and I didn't have that empowerment. I didn't have that ability to defend myself. And then when you got when I got into jiu-jitsu, I got this empowerment, like, man, this stuff works. And I knew it worked because I could see it, I could feel it. And I got to a certain level, like blue belt level, where guys coming off the street, back then it was very, very confrontational. I mean, a lot of people, their first time, they were just there to see if it worked. They weren't there necessarily. Like the students that come in now, they come in because they come in now because they know it works and they want to learn. Back then it was very different.
Yeah, there was a question. I know a lot of people, they would think it was luck that you got a rear naked choke or
Correct.
Whatever you did. They're like, anyone can
Let's
do that.
Let's do that again. Yeah, there were a lot of challenges and things like that, and so it was kind of rough. So I had the ability to know, like, yeah, this stuff works. Like, this guy came in here, he's a karate guy, he wants to do this, and I'm able to choke him out. So there was a certain point where I was still young enough, but just had this like superpower pumped into me, where I don't want to say it was dangerous, but I was eager almost to regain that confidence.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time now that I was more dangerous as a blue belt than I am as a black belt, because now I have the confidence to do the same thing that I was talking about before. Somebody tries to pick on me now, I can use the same self-deprecating humor I did to get out of fights before.
Yeah.
But I can walk away feeling great.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have to hurt that guy. I don't need to prove myself. As a young blue belt, like there was a little bit. I was still young and impressionable and not that smart, So yeah, I mean, and I didn't abuse it at all. I really didn't. I mean, there were a few times. There was one specific time where I ended up having a fight, and I was doing the right thing at the beginning, defending some girls against a kind of a jerk guy.
When was this? How old were you?
This was probably this was when I was maybe a blue belt, maybe I don't know. I was probably 23, maybe 21, 21 to 23, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly, but it became an issue. I got them separated. The guy circled the block and came around, and then there was another confrontation. And I had the ability. At that time, I could have, now, Robin, as of now, could probably have walked away from that fight. Again, as a kid who was picked on a lot, and then all of a sudden being imbued with this superpower almost,
Yeah.
I think at that point it was probably a bad choice. I think I could have walked away from that fight. I wasn't fully confident. I was confident enough to get into a fight.
Yeah.
But not confident enough to walk away from it.
Yeah.
Now I realize,
yeah, you're much older now, and I tell my son, avoid it. Run if you have to. Don't
100%.
Engage. Someone put their hands on you.
You're going to win 100% of the fights you don't get into.
Yeah, and you never know what might happen. You might hit them, and then they have a brain aneurysm. You go to jail for the rest of your life.
Gosh.
It's just,
it can ruin your life.
Nothing's worth it
in many ways. And it was a good lesson, and I'm grateful that I had a good mentor in Dr. Hudson. We talked about it after the fact, and so yeah, I'm grateful that I had jiu-jitsu to keep me safe, but at the same time, like it was an unnecessary thing, and I learned a lot from it. So
I would say 95% of people probably never use their jiu-jitsu on the streets, do they? It's just the confidence of knowing if you're confronted that you have that ability.
Exactly, and the confidence and the tranquility that comes from being a confident individual. I wish I had it as a kid. If I had it as a kid, I probably could have walked away from that fight and not had to, be concerned about it. But because I was picked on, I had a lot of that. I don't want to say trauma, but that experience as a kid.
Yeah.
Being picked on, and all of a sudden I had this like, oh, all right, try to mess with me now, and that was really a kind of a bad approach. But I came out of it.
Yeah.
I grew up a little bit.
Real quick for everyone listening, what belt are you? What degree?
Black belt, 6th degree black belt under Relson Gracie.
What Gracies have you rolled with? Have you rolled? What are the brothers, Hiron and they?
Hiron and Hinner, yeah.
Have you rolled with them?
Yes, I don't remember actually like sparring. I've been in class with both of them. I've trained with.
Are they on next level?
Are
they crazy?
Yeah. I don't remember actually sparring with Hinner. I've been in classes with him. Phenomenal instructor, great ambassador of jiu-jitsu. Huron, I consider a good friend. I like his personality. I like his demeanor and his just how he approaches jiu-jitsu in life. Is just resonates with me. He's just I consider him a good friend. Even though we don't talk all the time, I don't like to bug him. And he's busy with his family and vice versa.
What degree black belt is he?
I don't even remember.
When you guys
but he's
roll,
better than me. I'll say that.
When you guys roll, what's it like?
It's awesome. It's fun. Like he likes to say keep it playful.
Yeah.
But he'll still choke you. You know what I mean? Like it's.
Have you ever beat him?
No. Yeah, Huron's a lot better.
That's so fascinating to me. Like
he was a kid when I met him. You know what I mean? I was already an adult, but there's levels to this, and you have to realize, like, even though I had phenomenal instruction, I didn't start till I was 20 years old. We're built very similarly, but even though I was older than him, he started earlier than I did.
Yeah.
And as a kid, and when you look at these guys, especially the Gracies or any of these kids who start, or even my kids, for example, when they start at, let's say, 5 years old versus 20, it's a massive advantage because you're developing certain tendencies and abilities that you're never going to recover as an adult. So, for example, I have a student who grew up in Poland. He came over, this is just an analogy, but he came over from Poland when he was 11. His sister was 14. They're both adults now. His sister will always have an accent, but he sounds like he grew up in America. Mm-hmm. He can speak both languages fluently. And I think there's a certain cutoff in age where your genes or your ability to assimilate certain, especially musculature in your mouth to be able to speak. Like here in Hinner, they can speak, or any of the Gracie kids that grew up here, they can speak fluent Portuguese as well as English. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that to a certain degree, it's like if you started any sport at 20 years old, like say you started soccer at 20 years old, becoming a professional is going to be it's a very difficult thing. Mm-hmm. So I guess the way I look at it is like I'll always have an accent. Mm-hmm. Those guys are just fluent. Yeah. They just grew up with it. Their body does things that, I had to develop as an adult. Yeah. Very young adult, but nonetheless as an adult. And so they don't have a jiu-jitsu accent. They're just fluent in it. Yeah. If that's
that makes sense.
A correlation.
What popped in my head was Gordon Ryan.
Yeah.
27 years old, no gi.
Yeah.
Prodigy. And
started young though.
Did he?
Yeah, younger than me for sure. Yeah, I don't. He was at least in his teens.
What do you think makes him so good and so different from others? Is he that obsessed with it? Is it athletic ability?
Gordon Ryan is especially I think a lot of factors. He's got great coaching, phenomenal discipline. That's number one. I think honestly, you have to have the discipline to be able to train at that level, and the knowledge. I mean, it's a very cerebral game. Like he's an intelligent grappler. Mm-hmm. He's and he knows when to take coaching and how to take it. And this is just my impression. I've never been around him, but my impression of what I see. I don't like necessarily his online persona or how he, but there's no arguing the fact that he's just remarkable as a grappler. And he's a specialist. What you see now is you have specialists in that arena. He doesn't do gi, competitions. And I don't think if he put the gi on tomorrow, I think it would take him probably a year or two for him to win worlds.
Really?
I think so.
So if
maybe
he put
I'm
on
wrong about that.
If he put on a gi, do you think a blue belt could tap him?
No, not in the competition. No, you throw a gi on him, he's still a black belt. Not much is changing there. No, there's no doubt he's remarkable at what he does. I mean, he's the best out there right now. Yeah,
a black belt once told me, not you. His words were, "I know several stupid people that are amazing at jiu-jitsu," and it made me think that. I mean, jiu-jitsu is basically human chess. How do you? Yeah. I always thought there was a big thing of intelligence involved in jiu-jitsu. How can you be stupid and good in jiu-jitsu?
Well, I'm not sure I can necessarily agree with it with the black belt that told you that, but I understand probably what he probably meant was there's a lot of people who can who can be very, like you take a guy like LeBron James, right? You give him a year of jiu-jitsu, he's going to be a force to reckon with because he's athletically inclined already. People who are physically and athletically gifted are already in the realm of fighting forces to reckon with. That's why jiu-jitsu is important for the smaller, the weaker individual, is to be able to bridge that gap, that physical barrier. So there's a lot of people who can be effective at jiu-jitsu, but it doesn't necessarily mean, when I say effective, they can be effective at fighting. They can win a fight very well because of physicality. But it doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, equate to good jiu-jitsu. Good jiu-jitsu is the ability to bridge that physical barrier with technique, timing, and strategy, and the proper application of those principles and techniques. So
if you have a low IQ, you can be good at jiu-jitsu?
With physicality, for sure. You can be very tough in a fight. Good jiu-jitsu, being able to, I think, takes
a higher
intelligence.
IQ.
Yeah, absolutely. But the ones who really excel, in my opinion, technically, are the ones who have the discipline and the knowledge and that's gifted to them, and the ability to absorb that knowledge and relay it in a.
So one of your students that I believe he might have been a blue belt or a 4-stripe white belt when I started was BJ. And,
okay.
And I watched him he was a blue belt submitting brown belts, brown belt submitting black belts.
Very tough.
He went up the ranks
Yep.
very quickly.
Yes.
Is that rare to see?
Yes, it is. Because you're dealing with a guy, BJ, for example, very dedicated, right? Had a belief in himself. Also very intelligent. As tough as he is, he's a lot of times toughness and intelligence aren't always, people don't necessarily always equate them to be or kind of combine them together. But BJ was very tough, mentally, physically, gifted athlete, but
ex-Marine.
Yes, but that wasn't his best quality. His best quality was his perseverance and his belief in himself and his intelligence. Very gifted athlete, strong, very strong. I mean, good, a lot of physical attributes, right?
Yeah.
And that helped, but I don't think that's what helped him excel as much as his intelligence and his ability to study and understand the techniques and strategies of jiu-jitsu. And he's like myself. We were very obsessed. We got into this thing and we wanted to be the best we could be. He had those physical elements and those gifts, but that's not why. There's many people who've come to the door who had equal or better physical gifts, but weren't able to apply them the same way that he did.
Yeah. So when you train someone, you run a jiu-jitsu academy. When you train someone, they become a black belt and they open up their own gym. Is that okay? Does it ever sting? Is there a conversation that's had between that black belt and you before that happens?
Yes and no. When I was younger, I was very sensitive to those sorts of things. And, I'm like, what's wrong with us? Why are you leaving? Why, now I understand it a much,
This is his dream.
mature. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Take, a guy like BJ, for example. I knew fairly early on that he wanted to do this. Not necessarily for a living, but he wanted to do it like I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Like, wanted to put himself into it. He loved it enough, and he could have done he could have gone into any other avenue of business or you name it, but this is what he loved. This is what he was passionate about. This is what he wanted to do. So we knew early on that's what he wanted to do. So of course, I mean, how can you hold a guy back, like from doing what you're doing? There's always a way of doing it right. You know what I mean? Like there's I think there's a certain level of respect. And
I wouldn't want to have a grand opening without talking to you before all of a sudden you see a grand opening down the street.
I mean, there's right and wrong ways of doing anything like that. But certain considerations and, those things have to be done, I think, properly beforehand. But
it happens a lot probably, doesn't it? All over the
country.
country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it just comes down to how it's handled. Sometimes, the human side of you maybe get emotional and you react a certain way. But when things settle down, I mean, like
Yeah, because they normally take people with them as well, don't they?
yes, absolutely, yeah, and so that's
you're
one
not
of the
losing
reasons
one, you're losing a dozen.
correct. That's right, and there's always that deep down. There's that sense of like, what's wrong with me, sort of,
Yeah.
like. But once you get past that, once you realize, and I'm too old for that stuff.
Sometimes it's location also. Like for
course,
someone like
yeah.
a white belt like me,
Yeah.
a blue belt can train me. I don't need a black belt. So
Of course.
it was more convenience for me.
Yep.
But once you get to a higher level, I think you might have to travel around a
Of
little
course,
bit to some
yeah.
different gyms.
Yeah, and everybody has a different path, right? And there's sometimes where it's just sometime like you got to leave the house.
Yeah.
Like you got to leave mom and dad and go on and sow your oats and do your thing and be passionate about what you're doing and to hold somebody back, I think in a lot of ways from that is it's selfish, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
If you could master one move to only use in a street fight for the rest of your life, what would that technique be?
one move. Ooh. So it's difficult to say one move, but I could say one strategy. And I think the most important would be the clinch or distance management, being able to avoid the strikes, because that's where, or the damage from the strikes, because that's the most common type of aggression. If you're talking about like a fight without a weapon involved, the most common type of aggression would be a strike, headbutt, elbow, punch, and distance management. So as a concept is, I would say, probably the most important aspect of jiu-jitsu, being able to understand how to close distance, timing, having a good clinch, being able to do the same thing on the bottom if you're stuck on the bottom of of any position.
So you
How
would
to
have a
control
good
it.
clinch, and from there,
Clinch.
you can.
That's where
do a lot
jiu-jitsu
of-
shines. When I first started jiu-jitsu, it was basically, it was preached into us that if you don't have a good clinch, you don't have good jiu-jitsu.
Really?
Because any guy out there with good natural physical ability doesn't have to be well trained to be dangerous. So when we talk about well trained people, we're talking about, or skilled players, we're talking about people who are skilled in the martial arts. There's a lot of people who are skilled in the martial arts, right, who aren't necessarily deadly or dangerous. And there's a lot of people who are not skilled in the martial arts who are very dangerous. I'm sure you've seen plenty of fights growing up. There's a lot of kids, a lot of people who are just naturally gifted at fighting.
Yeah.
Physically just gifted in the ability to fight with another human being. And the most common types of aggression are strikes.
Yeah, I would say for girls, if I had a little girl right now, I would totally get her into jiu-jitsu. Parents, I'm sure when their kids go off to college, it's their worst nightmare to have
Yes,
their daughter assaulted or something.
Yes.
How effective do you think that would be for a girl that's, say, 120 pounds that knows jiu-jitsu against a guy that weighs 200 pounds and there's an altercation, she's off in college? I would say 90% of the time she's going to submit that guy, put him to sleep, and get out of that situation if she knows jiu-jitsu.
It's difficult to say because, are you talking about a blue belt? Are you talking about a white belt? Are you
Let's
talking
say
about a black
say
belt?
a blue belt.
Yes.
A blue
So-
belt, 120-pound girl.
It's still a tall order in a real fight. But many of those things that we're talking about, those worst case scenarios are nightmares for our girls especially, or any of our kids, typically start with a sort of I don't want to say a grooming sort of situation, but it starts with a small thing, a small break in the boundary. You know what I mean? Like a touch that's unwanted. Mm-hmm. Okay, so all right, if that's okay, then I can go this far, if that makes sense. It's not always that case. Sometimes it can be very violent right away, but quite often it becomes a very familiar, like, okay, I'm going to go a little further. I'm going to go a little further, and then no, that's okay. So what we really
So
want
it depends
is,
on when they strike, when the girl
that's
decides
right.
she wants to.
And when no, like when that, so that's a barrier. Being able to say no, okay, that's enough. Right? You can come this far, but no more. The reality is, and I think Eve Gracie said this the best, and I quote her all the time. So I'm gonna give her credit for this but it was a brilliant quote. It's like, and I hope I don't butcher it, Eve, but basically what she said was that, girls need to, and not even just girls, but our kids, everybody need the ability. But let's talk about the women especially, our daughters, right? We want them to be able to set a boundary, right, and be confident in that. But the reality is that if they don't have the confidence to defend that boundary, they're less likely to set it. Mm-hmm. So if they're given that confidence and they're told at a young age and they're taught, okay, you are worth defending, and here's how to do it, right? They're more likely to be able to say that, to say, no, that's enough. Stop right there. And a lot of times, many times, those altercations can be minimized or stopped earlier on. And that's what we want. We want that ability for our daughters and our even our sons to be able to say, that's enough. Don't come any closer. Don't do that. Don't touch me that way. But if they don't have the confidence to do that, they're less likely to really do that, to set that boundary. If they don't have that ability deep down, or even the understanding that it's okay for me to fight back, and being able to portray that. Like, if you go further, you're going to pay a price. And
so a black belt girl weighing 120 pounds against a 200-pound guy, like what percentage?
A non-skilled person?
Non-skilled. Just
by
fight.
nature of being a size disparage there like that, depending on the physicality of the individual, it's still going to be a tall order. But jiu-jitsu makes it possible. I can't say this is a guarantee.
If you were to guess,
there's no other thing that on the planet is going to, with the exception of a weapon, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. But with the exception of having entering a weapon into the fight, there's nothing better that's going to suit your daughter, to be able to survive that interaction than jiu-jitsu, bar none.
Yeah.
Throwing the weapon into it, people are like, I gave my daughter some pepper spray. But really? Does she know how to use it? Does she know how to turn it on? Is she going to have it in her hand? Like a lot of these altercations, they're not like the altercations that men have with men at that age. A lot of times you see it's a confidence or like a chest beating sort of thing. Like that's how fights happen with it's almost like like overly aggressive and silly, and those are pride fights. That's not a fight for your life or a fight to prevent somebody from raping you. That's a difference. That's a different level of intensity, in my opinion. And I think and quite often those scenarios, those altercations don't start like this with hands up, like let's face off. It's a grab or a touch that's unwanted, and it's already a grappling situation. It's not necessarily a strike. And if you're sitting on a bed, how well can you throw an elbow or a headbutt or a kick? Even sometimes the person's over top of you, like that's where jiu-jitsu is going to shine. And I think that's the real value there is telling those kids early on, you are worth defending, and here's how to do it most effectively against somebody who's bigger, stronger, heavier than you. So I can't say that jiu-jitsu is the magic pill that 120-pound female is not going to. But we've seen it happen. We've seen those situations where women who are very, very skilled easily submit adult men. It's never a guarantee.
In class, you've seen that?
Oh yeah, no, and even real life. I mean, there's videos out there of professional MMA fighters or female black belts who have dealt with men who are much bigger in real altercations and submitted them. And so
your wife, she's a blue belt?
She is.
And is she submitting grown men?
Yeah. I mean, it's always difficult. She's sitting over there right now, but
she's like, of course I am submitting grown men.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Does she ever ask when her next stripe's coming, or
no?
You do the promoting,
never.
right?
She never asks. No, nobody here asks. They do automatic 6 months. You got to wait more.
I was going to ask you about some celebrities that. There's more celebrities that do jiu-jitsu than I thought.
Yeah.
So if you were to roll no gi with Joe Rogan, what do you think? If you were a betting man, who would win?
That's hard to say. I really don't know. I mean, And if I said that, like I could submit him, that would sound boastful. I really don't know. I know that,
Ashton Kutcher.
Well, it's hard to say.
I think he's a
You're
brown
putting me
belt.
on the spot. I mean, obviously I have a lot more experience than him.
Okay, Al Bundy.
Al's a legit black belt.
I know.
mean, I've never rolled with
believe
him, but he's originally from Canton. We were always waiting on him to show up. I met him on my first trip out to California. He was sitting next to Grandmaster Elio. But Al's, like legit Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Yeah,
so,
I wonder how he had time for that. Like he just
think he
for
just
me,
made time, yeah.
I would leave class and then I would think about it. I would watch videos and it would consume me to the point where I was like, I got to get back to business, with my business and my family, and so
Sure.
I just don't know how sometimes people have time for it.
Yeah,
If you can leave it on the mat, that would be
it's-
great. 3
right.
hours a week, leave here and don't think about it again, but that's almost impossible.
It's hard, yeah. But that thinking about it on the way home and the way to, or in bed at night, that's what drives you to come back the next time. Mm-hmm. And it actually, I think in a lot of ways, helps you solve problems because you're thinking about them, but you're not in the grind.
Yeah.
Right. So like, equate that to business. Sometimes I solve the best business problems in my bed at home at night, thinking about it.
Same here.
As opposed to being in the busis.
Yeah,
You know what I
same
mean? Sometimes
here.
you got to step out for a second, decompress.
Mm-hmm.
And jiu-jitsu is very similar. Like, there are quite a few times where I'd be driving home thinking about a problem, like I got caught in this. I'm like, oh, maybe I should try this. I've almost wrecked numerous times, just being so zoned in, just automatically driving and thinking about jiu-jitsu. Like, oh man, I got. Or at home at night, waiting to fall asleep and thinking about like, man, I should try this. I'm going to do that. And sometimes it would work, like I'd have the ability for, to step away from the chaos of the actual interaction or the sparring session, which is, a little bit more intense than laying in your bed at night.
Yeah.
And being able to let, the technique or the situation assimilate to your body and your mind and stop and think and like, I'm going to try this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it works.
Yeah.
Not always, but,
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes where your brain kind of kicks in the creativity, and sometimes you need that space and that time to step back and not always just be on the mat all the time. Just let it soak in. So.
Yeah. I think for most people, if they just keep it in their life, whether it's once a month or I've gone 2 years without going, and then I'll go to open mat, and then I might go to a few classes. So always been in my life, but I'm definitely not even a blue belt yet, and it's been 14 years.
It'll come, man. It'll come.
So out of 100 new students, what's the retention rate? How many will stick around over a year out of 100?
Whoa, that's a better question for my wife. What do you think?
She takes
Out
care of the
100?
numbers. She probably has exact
she
percentage.
She understands the numbers. We stay in our lanes pretty well. I stick most of my time on the mat. I would say it's hard for me to say. I would say
5%.
Maybe after a year here, maybe I would say at least 10%. Would you agree with that? I would say at least 10%, maybe even closer to 20.
Oh, nice.
But that number has increased. It's improved a lot over time. I would say 20 years ago, that number was more like 1%.
At what point does it become part of your life, jiu-jitsu?
It's
you
different
have to
for
have
everyone. A lot of people get to like blue belt level, and then they go and find another hobby. I think there's always, I would say, out of the folks that get to blue belt, I would say that there's probably, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just throwing numbers out there. This is just my best guess. I would say 20% of those are hooked enough to keep coming. And as long as life doesn't throw, family obligations, work takes them away, or a physical injury prevents them from training, I would say this 20% stick around for a good bit after achieving blue belt. Quite a few, once they hit blue belt, a lot of people just move on to a different hobby. They're just like, I like it, and that's okay. So there's a lot of folks out there, good friends of mine even, that just they'll shame the blue belts. It's a very common thing in the jiu-jitsu world to like, oh well, got his blue belt, guess we won't see him again, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's just at that level, or the level that, I dove myself into, I was obsessed with it. Not everybody's going to be obsessed with what you're obsessed with.
Yeah.
And by the time they get their blue belt, they've really gained a lot of the value and the benefits that jiu-jitsu can offer. They have a healthier mindset when they're training, especially getting to blue belt level, which I would say is probably about a two-year average. If you're inundated in something for 2 years, enough to get to a blue belt level, it's already made a positive impact on your life. And so a lot of people take that and they just move on to something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is what it is. And I think that, I'm obsessed with it because it's my life's work.
Yeah.
At this point, so that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to keep going on. Like when I first started, that was my objective. I wanted to be blue belt because I could tell that the guys that were blue belts in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu were black belts in the street. And that was words straight from my instructor's mouth, like straight from Relson Gracie. Blue belt is like black belt in the street. And he's right. And a lot of those challenge matches in the early days were guys who, black belts from other martial arts come in and blue belts would beat them easily because they knew how to implement that strategy. So many of these folks have that ability and they've gained that confidence that's come with it, and they can go on and apply it to other things.
So for those people out there that are working a 9-to-5 job and they're on the fence about starting their own business, obviously you've built a successful business over the past 14, 15 years, however long it's been. What advice would you give them just to get going with their new business idea?
Honestly, I would, there's a lot of things, but I would say that do something you're passionate about. Start there. Because if you're passionate about it, you're going to have more drive to do it. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I wrote that down, and I was like, I don't even remember. I can't. Somebody will be able to Google that and find out who said that. But that was it. It resonated with me. I wrote it down in my journal. I was like, that's it. I'm not trying to fill a need that I think somebody wants as far as a business. I want to do what I'm passionate about. If I'm passionate about it, then that will resonate with other people. And if it's a good thing, they're going to, it can eventually be a business. I never got into this to make this a business or even my livelihood. I just wanted to do it. But then once I got to a certain point, then I had to really, like we were talking about earlier, I had to push myself, as far as discipline goes, I had to push myself into the avenues or the parts of the business that I didn't really necessarily enjoy, but were necessary. But you have to push yourself into the uncomfortable to eventually become comfortable. And there's a lot of freedom in that, that struggle.
So where can people find your YouTube channel and your website if they want to check you out?
GracieOhio.com, and then everything on social media is basically YouTube/Gracie Ohio, or Instagram Gracie Ohio. You do a search on YouTube Gracie Ohio, you'll find us.
What a great domain. GracieOhio.com. You would not get that
No. And
when did you register that?
So I got to give when Dr. Hudson handed the business over to me, I had to get a website. There was no website at the time, and it was all new. I think it was 2003.
Oh, so early.
That was early.
So much Gracie stuff available back then, I'm sure.
I had no idea, but that was actually, I have to credit my good friend Phil Cardella. Phil, he's down in Florida now, a great friend. I've known him for a very, very long time. He's like, I'm throwing all these, Gracie Columbus. No, Gracie Ohio, man. Gracie Ohio. I'm like, okay, all right. So I registered the domain. I had no idea what to do. He helped me out. I remember we were in a small apartment, me and my wife, and he's like, no, GracieOhio.com. Perfect.
Yeah.
Like, okay, all right.
That's awesome.
So I got to credit Phil for that. He's kind of branded us, I guess, that.
That's cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.